You remember your first meeting with Crosby, Stills and Nash?
Well, yeah, it was kind of different. I remember after Clear Light broke up, I had heard that Buffalo Springfield had broken up and that Stephen Stills was looking for a drummer. So I remember getting Stephen's number and calling him, and we actually ended up getting together and doing some sessions. And we did some demo sessions, and I remember Bill Halverson was with him at the time. And in New York, prior to that, I had met David Crosby. David had come to see, the Clear Light was playing at the Electric Circus in New York, and Steve Paul's scene at the time. And David Crosby, loved the band and used to come and watch us. And then I met Graham Nash. I had met John Sebastian, and I met Graham Nash. So I'd met them all separately, but we all kind of hooked up in the studio doing John Sebastian's record. And they had, kind of gotten together and decided they were going to do an acoustic folk album together, and went off to England to rehearse that. And I obviously stayed with John Sebastian, never assuming that I would be a part of the band, because it was going to be like a Peter, Paul, and Mary situation. And we ran into each other. It just, fate as fate would have it, I flew into New York the same time that Crosby, Stills and Nash flew in from London, and we were all supposed to go out to John Sebastian's house in Sag Harbor, Long Island, and that's where we ended up jamming together. And it was then it then occurred to them that I could play along with their vocals and not drown them out, but indeed enhance what was going on. So they decided to bring me in, and then they went back. I had to finish the John Sebastian record, and they actually started recording without me. In fact, they had Jim Gordon come in and play the drums for a couple of songs. By the time I got back, those songs were recorded, but what I ended up doing was playing over Jim Gordon's tracks, all except Marrakesh Express. He did such a great job on that we decided just to keep it. And then we had 3 singers and a drummer, and it was it was obvious that we needed a band if we were going to go out on the road. And so when we finished that first Crosby, Stills and Nash record, David and Graham went sailing. I guess David had to pick up his boat in Florida, so Graham went with him. And Stephen and I left for London and New York, then London, looking for musicians. And we asked John Sebastian, and he turned us down. We asked Phil Everly. We asked Eric Clapton, Steve Winwood, George Harrison. Nobody wanted to play with us. So we got back to Sag Harbor rather discouraged, and one of the managers, our manager David Geffen at the time, grew up with Elliot Roberts, who was Neil Young's manager, and suggested that we ask Neil Young in the band. And I remember driving out to where Neil was playing at the time, and saying to Stephen, "Gee, man, do you think this is a really good idea?" I remember that's, you guys fighting was the reason that Buffalo Springfield broke up. And he said, "Oh, no, man, it'll be cool." That was then and this is now. And boy, it sure turned out, it was like I had this ominous feeling, and sure enough, it just turned out to be not a good combination. It was a good combination musically, but certainly not personality-wise.
What are your memories of the sessions for the Deja Vu album with Neil as the addition there?
It was a nightmare.
Yeah.
It took us almost a year or longer to finish the album. He was so difficult and insisted on taking his song. I mean, that's when the band became separate. That's when it became, everybody's individual songs, and it was arguments and fighting and yelling and crying. I remember Graham standing in the middle of the studio crying, going, my God, you guys are destroying our dream. What are you doing? And it was just awful. The music obviously was great, but I'll tell you, it was like pulling teeth, and it was the beginning of the end for the band, and I was heartbroken. I remember it was just, I felt so powerless over it. As something that I had been so proud of, watch it go right down the drain.
Personally, did you feel a part of the group, or did you feel more like a hired hand at times?
Well, in the beginning, I remember when we had our meeting before Neil Young, and they said, "Listen, we really want you to be a part of the band. We want to split the gigs equally with you. We want to give you a point. We're each going to pay you a point off the records. And if you end up writing anything, I wasn't a writer, so I didn't even consider, getting paid for the writing. But I was offered a piece. It really was about the three singers and a drummer. That's why they put my picture on the back of the album. If I was a sideman, they wouldn't have bothered to do that, obviously. But that first Crosby, Stills and Nash record with them sitting on the couch is, I'm looking out the back door. So I was a part of, yet not a part of. And I remember when we, were trying to name the band, and I remember Stephen coming up with a name, the Frozen Noses, for obvious reasons. And, everybody kind of guffawed at it, but it really wasn't pursued. And Geffen and Roberts really kind of encouraged them to keep it Crosby, Stills, and Nash. And, we talked about it, and it was decided, and I agreed that, I would be kind of the mystery kid, that they would be able to, people would want to know who I was, and, it would kind of be a part of our mystique, and except when Neil came in the band, then it became Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young, and I was kind of pushed further in the background. Still getting points and obviously sharing in the in the monies for the live performance. But what I didn't know at the time was there was no money for live performance. That we lived so lavishly. We had our own 707. We drove. It was first class all the way. Well, the lawyers and the managers got paid, but there was no money left at the end of the tour. So, I ended up not making any money off touring, and just kind of, got further and further into, the drugs and the alcohol, because I felt, I felt like my dream was dying, and that I was, powerless over making it better, and powerless over changing the situation. I was watching it, unravel before my eyes, and it certainly, although I don't blame that on the drug use, but, I went overboard on the drugs, and we broke up in Denver in 1971 on stage. Neil Young walked off the stage, and, I remember Neil Young, Stephen fired Greg Reeves because Greg's, playing was getting worse, and he was becoming more and more bizarre. I guess his drug use was increasing. But Greg was a good friend of Neil's, so, that didn't work. That didn't sit too well with Neil. And the problems with Stephen and Neil were obvious from the beginning, especially, I remember through Deja Vu with them. So when we broke up in Denver, Neil walked off the stage and said, "I'm never working with Stephen Stills again." And actually, David and Graham sided with Neil. I couldn't believe it. So they fired Stephen on the spot, and they were going to finish the tour without Stephen. And of course, I said, "No, that's not going to happen." And I flew back to Los Angeles with Stephen, and I said, "Well, screw him. We'll start another band. We started this one. We'll do another one." And of course, when they got back into town, Ahmet Ertegun and all the big shots from Atlantic Records says, "If you don't finish this tour, you'll never work again, and we'll break your legs." So that's when Neil said, "Well, if I have to finish the tour with Stephen, then Dallas has to go." And that's when I was informed I was out. So that was the end of it for me, as far as Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young goes. But Stephen and I stayed together and did all his solo stuff, and then we formed Manassas, which was certainly my favorite band of the whole bunch.
Terrific. Yeah, it was a terrific band.